Morning, kids. With Tory MP Andrew Bridgen facing a 5-day suspension for bribery and threats, let's talk about the Tory party as the self-named party of law and order. Basically, it's another lobbying scandal. Andrew Bridgen had an offer of a 12 grand advisory contract with a company called Mere Plantations. They also donated £5,000 to his local Tory constituency office, meaning it was effectively money towards his re-election campaign. They also bought him a trip to Ghana. Now, with potential conflicts of interest like that, you're supposed to formally register them. He didn't do that. He also tried to pressure ministers on behalf of Mere Plantations without telling them that he was effectively being paid to do it. And so the Parliament's Committee on Standards found him guilty of breaking lobbying rules. And while this was going on, Andrew Bridgen wrote to Catherine Stone, the commissioner of the committee, telling her that he'd heard rumours that she'd been offered a place in the House of Lords if she decided his case in a certain way, basically threatening her reputation. And the Committee on Standards saw it the same way, so they found him guilty of another breach of the rules. Now the fun thing is, that story came out exactly 1 year after the Tories voted to change the rules to protect Owen Paterson after he was found guilty of paid lobbying. So the Bridgen story isn't just the second Tory lobbying scandal in the space of a year, it's the second time the Tories have tried to cover it up. Because Owen Paterson was paid £112,000 by private corporations and lobbied on their behalf in Parliament. And that's more than an MP's salary, so as a matter of basic democracy, who was his real boss? And the Standards Committee said it was the most prolific case of paid lobbying in UK history. And when Boris Johnson proposed to change the rules to protect him from a 30-day suspension, only 6 of the 358 Tory MPs voted against it. This is textbook corruption, and it's across the Tory party. And remember, we call it lobbying, but it's really bribery. Because isn't that what we're supposed to call it when a government official accepts hundreds of thousands of pounds from a third party in order to influence the laws of the UK? But we call it lobbying because we like to give privileged people cuter names for their crimes, even though they're often on a larger scale and hurt way more people. You know, like the difference between blue-collar crime and white-collar crime. Let's say Mandy steals a bunch of food from Asda. She's a thief. But Tarquin illegally fiddles the books to keep millions of pounds away from HMRC. That's tax evasion. Now, Tarquin has done a lot more damage to many more people, but which sounds worse? Tax evasion or theft? Mandy was a single mum trying to feed her kids. Tarquin just wanted another sports car. But paid lobbying is above blue collar and white collar. We're talking about illegally influencing the laws that affect the economy of 70 million people and making a profit. I don't know what color you call that. Supreme white? Because they're so privileged that we don't even call their crimes criminal, because they're part of the political class. The simple truth is that even though not all of the law breaking done by the Tories technically counts as criminal within a strict legal definition, it's often worse than the criminal equivalent. The problem is we don't have a legal system that's able to hold them to account, or news channels that even want to, with a couple of exceptions. Take Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick, who helped the Tory donor avoid paying £45 million in council fees that would have gone on low-income housing 2 weeks before that donor paid £12,000 to the Tory party. That's bribery and taking £45 million away from struggling families. And he even admitted that his actions were unlawful, so how is he not called out as a criminal or at least a lawbreaker every time he goes on TV? And Prime Minister Rishi Sunak broke the law over lockdown, and it's not just that he committed a criminal offence while Chancellor of the UK. He did it during a pandemic where up to 1,000 people were dying a day, knowing that the law-breaking of Dominic Cummings had already damaged the public's willingness to follow the rules. Meaning that if he got caught setting a bad example, it would have a knock-on effect on the public and endanger even more lives. He shouldn't be able to get through a single interview without somebody mentioning that. Or the fact that he had his own lobbying scandal when he was Chancellor, texting former Prime Minister David Cameron, who was working for Greensill, a company that was trying to get COVID loans from the government. Sunak texted Cameron to reassure him that he was pushing his team to help him out. That's our current Prime Minister giving special access to a former Prime Minister's business that was trying to get money from the government during an economic crisis. Is this brought up in news interviews? Nope. Now, obviously, Boris Johnson repeatedly broke lockdown rules, but he was also found by the Supreme Court to have unlawfully shut down Parliament when he was trying to force through a no-deal Brexit that would have been even more damaging than the Brexit we have now, which according to the government's own analysis is even more economically damaging than COVID. The guy literally disabled our democracy in violation of the law in order to run down the clock on Brexit negotiations to get a Brexit that in 2016 he promised would never happen. Now, both Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson broke these laws while senior ministers, but before they really took power as Prime Minister. Now, if we had a real written constitution, i.e. some proper rules to our democracy, surely a top rule would be you don't get to run for Prime Minister if you've already broken the law as an MP. It would also probably say that if the winning side of a vote or an election breaks the law, e.g. by, I don't know, overspending by £449,000, then the result can't be considered legitimate. And also that if you tell lies that end up knocking billions of pounds off our GDP, or cripple the NHS to the point of costing lives during a national crisis, maybe that should count as misconduct in public office, and you should be held criminally responsible for it. Because again, if I told a lie on my taxes and took even £1,000 away from the public purse, I'd be in jail, not Downing Street. Boris Johnson's lies cost the UK £100 billion. The average person, even if there were no police to stop them, they wouldn't be able to steal that amount of money, even if they spent every single day of the rest of their lives thieving. George Clooney could never! And Transparency International, the global anti-corruption charity, found that 99% of the government's COVID contracts were awarded without any competition process to make sure those companies could actually do the job. And there was a special VIP lane for companies with connections to higher-ups in the Tory party. For example, they spent £156 million on medical masks that didn't even work because they used a company set up by Liz Truss's advisor. So this fraud was endangering lives. And Transparency International also found that the contracts with those questionable connections were the ones most likely to be published late. Which is why the court said that Matt Hancock acted unlawfully. So there was clear fraud going on, and Matt Hancock was part of it, even personally, because he owned shares in his sister's company while his department was giving them contracts. And people were dying. The Parliament's inquiry found that the failure to lock down on time at the start of the pandemic was one of the worst public health failures in UK history, causing at least an extra 20,000 deaths. So they broke the law repeatedly over lockdown, and people died who didn't need to die. And what's the guy the Tories put in charge doing now? He's still an MP. In fact, he's going on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here while Parliament is still in session, and there's nothing to stop him running for MP again. And who can forget when they publicly admitted that their new Brexit plan
does break international law in a very specific and limited way,
in order to go against a Brexit deal that they just spent 3 years telling everybody was the will of the people. Or the fact that our current Prime Minister had a US green card, i.e. was considered a resident of the United States of America, while he was Chancellor of the UK during this parliamentary term, which definitely breaks US immigration laws about holding public office in other countries, and should have been deemed a conflict of interest here, but basically the Tories got one of their mates to sign off on it. And again, everything I've just said is a mixture of rule breaking, law breaking, and actual crime, but when the consequences of these violations is major damage to the economy and actual loss of life, clearly we need better systems of accountability to keep these criminals out of power. And I know a bunch of you are screaming, but Labour did this, or Labour had this scandal. Do you see a Labour rosette on my top? I'm not here for Labour, so hear me when I tell you, I don't care. We live in a two-party system, and Labour is the only one of those two that has the possibility of giving us a proportional voting system and therefore ending that two-party system. I was recently in a big debate with a bunch of people who were telling me off for acting like changing a voting system to PR would suddenly solve all of our problems, including the problems in Labour. And of course it won't, but without proportional representation, we can't really solve anything. It's because our voting system basically makes us a two-party state that neither party feels like they have to behave properly in order to get your vote. Because Labour can basically say, hey, at least we're not the child-starving, austerity-mongering racists in the Tory party, and they'll get most of the left-wing vote. And the Tories can say, hey, at least we're not the BLM socialists, and they'll get most of the right-wing vote. Why? Because everybody knows that if you want your vote to count, your party has to come first in your constituency. And most know that there's really only one party in their constituency, if any, with a real shot at beating the party that they really don't want to be in power. And both parties take advantage of that. It's a duopoly. But when we finally get a proportional system where more than one MP can be elected per voting district, everybody will know that even if their party only gets 10% of the vote, they'll still get an MP to represent their views. So everybody will finally feel free to vote for the party that best represents them. So if Labour or the Tories aren't acting right, their vote share will go down, and so will their power. There'll no longer be any such thing as a safe seat, and they'll finally start to fear pissing us off. They won't be able to shag their colleagues during lockdown, illegally get tens of thousands of people killed, skive off parliament sessions so they can go eat koala balls in Australia, and then expect to be in parliament at the next election. Now yes, Hancock had the Tory whip removed for the I'm a Celeb thing, so you won't be able to benefit from the two-party system unless the Tories take him back. But you get my point. Going on I'm a Celebrity is far from the worst thing I've mentioned today. It's just the most publicly embarrassing. Because unlike the other stuff the Tories have done, nobody dies on I'm a Celebrity. We need three things in order to get some genuine accountability for the frankly criminal behavior of the Tories and politicians in general. 1. We need a voting system that will make politicians genuinely scared to disappoint the public. 2. We need a written constitution that bans law-breaking politicians from holding public office. 3. We need TV journalists to start talking to politicians who've broken the law like they're politicians who've broken the law. Have a great week.